The wind howled through the jagged peaks of eastern Afghanistan's Khyber province, carrying with it the bitter sting of ice and the metallic tongue of gunfire. Lieutenant Mason Reyes lay pressed against a rock outcrop, his breath forming quick, shallow clouds in the freezing air. Beside him, Petty Officer First Class Marcus Harlan slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle, the click of the bolt locking forward, barely audible over the steady chatter of enemy machine guns. They had been in this valley for 14 hours. 14 hours of hell. What had begun as a textbook rescue mission had unraveled within minutes. Intelligence had reported that their high-value informant, a wiry, middle-aged Afghan man named Kadir, had been captured by a Taliban splinter cell operating in the high ridges. The mission was supposed to be simple. Insert under cover of darkness, retrieve Kadir, and extract before dawn. It wasn't simple. They'd found Kadir, but the extraction point was compromised almost immediately. The Taliban had been waiting for them. A blistering ambush tore into their formation as soon as they emerged from the compound where Kadir was being held. Mason had felt the sharp heat of a bullet slice the air past his cheek before the world became a frenzy of shouts, flashes, and the staccato roar of rifles. Now they were cornered. The valley was a dead end, sheer rock walls on one side, enemy positions dug in on the other. Every attempt to move had been met with bursts of gunfire. 2 of his men were already wounded. 1, badly. Kadir lay on the ground behind them, a makeshift bandage pressed to his side, his face pale but determined. Reyes keyed his radio. "Overlord, this is Iron Dagger 1. We're running low on ammo. Situation's critical. Requesting immediate extraction." Static hissed in his ear. Then a broken voice. "Iron Dagger 1, Overlord. Stand by. We're assessing options." Assessing options meant they had none. Mason glanced at the ammo pouch on his vest. 3 magazines left. He did a quick mental calculation. Less than 10 minutes of sustained fire if things got ugly. His men had even less. The enemy was patient, confident, letting them burn through what little ammunition they had left. In the Joint Operations Center, miles away, the atmosphere was tense. A wall of screens displayed maps, drone feeds, and live comms from the valley. Weather reports were grim. Thick cloud cover, intermittent snow, visibility near zero. The enemy's positions were heavily fortified, with at least 2 confirmed man-pads, shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles covering the approaches. Helicopter rescue was suicide. Fast jets couldn't maneuver in the narrow valley without slamming into rock. One name flashed across the assignment board. Capt. Lavra Ironhawk Daniels. She sat in the corner of the operations room, helmet in her lap, listening. She had been on standby after flying a mission earlier that morning, still smelling faintly of jet fuel and cordite. As the briefing officer outlined the situation, she studied the satellite imagery. The valley was a trap, a narrow cut between. Jagged cliffs, barely wide enough for her A-10 Thunderbolt II to turn in. And with those man-pads waiting, it was a death box. The operations commander didn't even ask her. "No, go for fixed wing," he said flatly. "Weather's bad, visibility's crap. Man-pads are a high risk. We wait for ground forces to break through." Laura's jaw tightened. "They won't last that long. Daniels, you've seen the data. You wouldn't make it 5 minutes in there." Laura's eyes narrowed. "Then I'll make it 4 minutes and do the job in 3. The room fell silent. She wasn't smiling. Minutes later, she was walking briskly toward her A-10 on the tarmac, her ground crew moving like clockwork to arm the aircraft. The GAU-8 Avenger, a 7-barreled Gatling gun that could chew through tanks, was loaded and ready. The Warthog wasn't pretty, but it was the ugliest nightmare any enemy could face. She climbed the ladder, her gloves gripping the cold metal rungs. Sliding into the cockpit, she strapped in, her fingers moving over the familiar switches and dials. She took a deep breath, the oxygen mask cool against her face. Over comms, her crew chief's voice came through. "Ironhawk, you sure about this?" "Not even a little," she replied. "But they're not dying on my watch." The twin turbofans behind her roared to life, sending a low vibration through the ground. She taxied out, snow swirling in the prop wash. The runway stretched ahead, like a challenge. Back in the valley, Reyes heard another burst of gunfire and ducked instinctively. One of his men cursed as a bullet ricocheted off the rock beside them. The enemy was closing in, their shouts echoing in the cold air. Then, faintly over the howl of the wind, Reyes thought he heard something. It was low, distant, almost a growl. Harlan frowned. "You hear that?" The sound deepened, the kind of sound that doesn't just reach your ears. It crawls into your chest and shakes your bones. Reyes knew it instantly. He'd heard it before in firefights, when everything seemed lost and salvation came screaming. Out of the sky, the sound of an A-10 Warthog. He didn't dare believe it. No pilot would fly into this trap. But as the growl grew louder, a voice crackled through his headset. "Iron Dagger 1, this is Ironhawk. I've got you in sight." For the first time in hours, Reyes smiled. Somewhere over the ridge, Lavra Daniels pushed her A-10 into a descent that every instructor she'd ever had would call insane. Her targeting pod locked onto flashes of gunfire below, marking enemy positions. She adjusted her course, her thumb hovering over the trigger. She had one thought as the valley opened beneath her. Let's make some noise. The A-10 Thunderbolt II wasn't designed to be graceful. Its thick wings and squat fuselage gave it the look of a bulldog, ugly, stubborn, and dangerous in a fight. But in the hands of Captain Lara Ironhawk Daniels, it was poetry in motion. Lavra had grown up under the big skies of rural Kansas, where the horizon stretched forever, and the air smelled of wheat and diesel. Her father was a crop duster, a wiry man with sunburned skin and hands like old leather. By the time Lavra was 14, she could thread a Piper Pawnee between wind turbines in a crosswind without breaking a sweat. "If you're not willing to fly low," her father used to say, "you're just sightseeing." That low-flying instinct had followed her into the Air Force. While other pilots preferred altitude, the safety of distance, Lavra believed in getting close enough to smell the cordite. The A-10, with its heavy armor and ability to take hits and keep flying, suited her perfectly. She'd flown over Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, earning a reputation for precision strafing runs that seemed to defy physics. Ground troops called her Ironhawk because when she swooped in, she struck fast, hit hard, and vanished before the enemy knew what happened. But the mission ahead wasn't just dangerous. It was the kind of suicide run that got pilots names etched onto memorial walls. She'd seen the drone footage, jagged ridges forming a stone corridor, the SEAL team pinned down at the far end. Low clouds clung to the peaks, swallowing visibility. The valley floor was a patchwork of snow, rock, and fire, muzzle flashes winking like sparks in the gloom. Intelligence confirmed at least 2 man-pads hidden among the rocks, plus multiple heavy machine gun positions. Her squadron commander had already given the order. No fixed-wing aircraft in the valley. The risk of losing both the pilot and the plane was too high. Lavra had listened in silence, her arms crossed, helmet resting on her thigh. She didn't argue right away. She knew from experience that arguing too soon just gave people time to tell you no twice. Instead, she waited for the room to go quiet, for the awkward silence that came when people realized their plan was to do nothing and hope for the best. Finally, she spoke. If we wait for ground forces to break through, they'll be counting. Bodies, those men don't have ours, her commander frowned. You've seen the terrain. You'd have to fly in lower than the ridgeline just to make a pass. That puts you in Manpad's range before you can even fire. It's not just bad odds, it's suicide. Sir, Lavra said evenly, my job isn't about odds. It's about doing what no one else will do when the people on the ground need it. The room stayed quiet. She could feel their eyes on her, some filled with doubt, others with the kind of wary respect she'd grown used to over the years. You'll have 4 minutes before fuel becomes critical, the commander said at last. Less if the wind's bad. 4 minutes is enough, she replied. Her decision made, she turned on her heel and headed for the flight line. The crew chief met her halfway, carrying a checklist and looking like he'd just swallowed a lemon. You're not actually doing this, are you? He asked. Apparently I am, she said, slipping her helmet on. Load me heavy, full cannon, full flares, and every damn missile we've got. Minutes later, the ground crew was swarming around the A-10, feeding 30mm shells into the Avenger's massive drum. Each round was the size of a soda can, capable of punching through armor like it was paper. The aircraft's underwing pylons bristled with a GM-65 Mavericks and rocket pods. Lavra climbed the ladder into the cockpit, the metal cold under her gloves. She strapped in, pulling the harness snug across her chest, and began flipping switches with practiced precision. The instrument panel came alive in a cascade of green lights. She keyed her mic. Ironhawk to tower, clearance for immediate takeoff. The tower's voice was tense. Ironhawk tower, be advised, weather in target area is deteriorating. Visibility at 500 feet. Crosswinds gusting at 25 knots. Copy, she said. I'll keep it under the clouds. The crew chief gave her a thumbs up from the tarmac. She returned it, then pushed the throttles forward. The twin General Electric turbofans spooled up with a low, hungry roar, vibrating through the cockpit. Snow swirled off the runway in eddies as the A-10 began its roll. Back in the valley, the SEAL team was down to their last magazines. Lieutenant Reyes could feel the hopelessness settling over his men like a weight. They'd radioed for help. Twice more, but the only reply had been the same static-filled "stand by" from command. He was starting to believe there was no one left out there who could reach them. Then he heard it. It started as a faint vibration in the ground, almost drowned by the wind. Harlan noticed it too, tilting his head. What is that? The sound grew, deep and mechanical, rolling through the valley like distant thunder. Reyes felt a flicker of recognition in his chest. No, it couldn't be. Not here. Not now. A new voice crackled in his headset, crisp and calm. Iron Dagger 1, this is Ironhawk. I've got eyes on your position. For a second, Reyes couldn't speak. He looked at Harlan, who grinned despite the dirt and blood on his face. Lavra banked her at 10 hard, dropping low enough that the peak seemed to scrape past her wingtips. Her targeting pod locked onto the flashes of enemy gunfire. She could see the SEAL's infrared strobes, faint through the mist. Targets acquired, she murmured to herself. The missile lock warning flashed in the corner of her HUD. She knew the manpads were somewhere down there, waiting. It didn't matter. She armed the cannon, the HUD reticle glowing red, and lined up her approach. In the valley, Reyes heard it clearly now, the unmistakable growl of the GAU-8 Avenger spooling up. That sound was salvation and vengeance rolled into one. And above them, Laura smiled grimly. Let's get their attention. Lieutenant Mason Reyes pressed his shoulder harder against the jagged rock, trying to make himself smaller as another burst of machine gun fire raked the stone inches above his head. Chips of granite stung his cheek like shards of glass. Across the narrow space between their cover, Petty Officer Harlan crouched low, sweat and melted snow dripping into his eyes as he ejected an empty magazine and slapped in his last one. They were down to minutes, maybe less, before the enemy closed in. The Taliban fighters had been probing their defenses all morning, sending small groups forward to draw fire, then pulling back, making Reyes and men burn through what little ammunition they had left. Now the enemy was massing for what felt like the final push. 2 of Reyes' men were wounded. Corporal Diaz had taken shrapnel in the thigh. The bleeding slowed, but not stopped by a tourniquet that was already soaked crimson. Petty Officer Beckett had caught a round through the shoulder. He could still hold a rifle, but every shot made him wince and gasp. Kadir, their informant, lay between them on the cold ground, his thin frame shivering under a tattered blanket. He'd taken a bullet in the side during the rescue and was fading fast. Reyes knew that if they didn't move soon, they'd be leaving him and themselves to the mercy of the enemy. Mercy, in this valley, didn't exist. The wind howled down the ridge like a living thing, carrying the smell of cordite and the distant shouts of enemy fighters. Reyes could hear them moving now, heavy boots crunching snow, the occasional clink of metal. The sound was getting closer. He glanced at his watch. 14 hours since insertion. 14 hours since everything went to hell. 14 hours without backup. Reyes keyed his radio. Iron Dagger 1 to Overlord. We are out of time here. I say again, we are out of time. Static. He bit back a curse. Then something strange happened. It was faint at first, almost drowned by the wind, a low vibration in the ground, like the rumble of distant thunder. Harlan's head snapped. Up, you hear that? Reyes did. And with every second, it grew louder, deeper, steadier. Not the erratic crack of gunfire, not the hollow echo of explosions. This was different. His brain recognized it before he consciously did. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon had a distinct sound, a metallic growl that seemed to resonate in your chest. He'd heard it before in Iraq, when an A-10 had saved his team from being overrun in a sandstorm. That sound was the difference between death and survival. But here, in this box canyon, no pilot would dare. The growl deepened, the air seeming to vibrate with it now. And then his radio crackled. Iron Dagger 1. This is Ironhawk. I've got eyes on your position. For a moment, Reyes just stared at the radio. Harlan broke into a grin that was half disbelieving, half manic. No way, he muttered. Copy, Ironhawk, Reyes replied, his voice steadier than he felt. We are danger close. Understood. Laura's voice came back, calm as if they were discussing the weather. Mark your position with IR strobes. Keep your heads down. Reyes quickly clipped his infrared strobe to the top of the rock he was using for cover. Around him, the other SEALs did the same. Above, Lovra banked her A-10 hard, the wings slicing through mist so dense it clung to the canopy. The targeting pod picked up the faint blinks of the eye strobes, locking in their coordinates. Around them, brighter flashes lit the ground. Enemy muzzle fire scattered in a wide arc around the SEAL's position. She rolled into a shallow dive, her HUD lighting up with target markers. The cannon's feed counter ticked down as the massive drum began to spin. On the ground, Reyes heard it, the whine of the GAU-8 winding up. He shouted over his shoulder, "Heads down, now." The first burst hit like the wrath of God, a deafening barrier-F through the valley. The sound so massive, it seemed to physically push against them. The air filled with the acrid scent of burning metal as depleted uranium rounds tore through an enemy position just 50 meters from the SEALs. Chunks of rock exploded into dust. A machine gun nest vanished in a cloud of debris. Enemy fighters, who had been so sure of their victory, scrambled for cover, their shouts turning to panicked cries. Reyes risked a glance over the rock. The hillside that had been spitting fire at them moments ago was now a smoking ruin. And in the distance, a gray shape streaked low across the valley, banking away into the clouds, the unmistakable silhouette of an A-10 warthog. Sweet mother of... Harlan started, but another warning shout cut him off. One of the Taliban fighters had managed to shoulder a Manpads launcher. The telltale puff of smoke announced the missile's launch, a white streak climbing fast toward the warthog. Above, Laura's missile lock warning screamed in her headset. She yanked the stick, rolling left and dropping flares in a brilliant cascade. The missile veered off, chasing the heat signature into empty air before detonating harmlessly against the cliffside. Lavra gritted her teeth, banking hard to swing back around. "Iron Dagger, you still with me?" "Still here," Reyes answered, his voice steadier now. "Good. I'm not leaving until you are." Her targeting pod painted another enemy position, a cluster of fighters regrouping near a boulder-strewn ridge. She armed her rockets this time, letting them loose in a blistering salvo that shattered the rocks and sent fighters scattering. Again, on the ground, the SEALs began moving their wounded into a tighter defensive circle, the sudden reprieve buying them precious minutes. Reyes felt a surge of something he hadn't let himself feel all day. Hope. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Lavra climbed slightly, preparing for another pass. Through her canopy, she could see the valley stretching ahead like a narrow scar in the earth. The SEAL's position, marked by those faint blinking strobes. Beyond them, the enemy was trying to regroup again, desperate to close the trap before. She could dismantle it piece by piece. Not today, she thought. The ridge lay silent for a moment after Alvarez's last transmission. Down below, the SEAL team hunkered behind shattered stone walls, every man watching the horizon for a sign they refused to admit might never come. Their situation was beyond. Badit was hopeless. The enemy had them pinned in a shallow basin, an open killing field that offered no route of escape. Their ammo was low, 2 men were already wounded, and the enemy's numbers were growing by the minute. In the cockpit of her A-10, Captain Jenna Rains listened to the static-filled chatter, her jaw tight. She'd been diverted from a routine patrol to investigate the emergency call, but as soon as she heard the fear masked, though it was in Alvarez's voice, she knew this was no ordinary rescue. She throttled up, her engines growling as she raced toward the coordinates. The Hog wasn't fast by fighter standards, but she didn't need speed, she needed presence. Below, the Taliban fighters began their final push. They moved like shadows. Through the ruins, firing bursts meant to force the SEALs to stay low. Every time a head lifted, bullets snapped past, chewing the dirt. Chief Daniels cursed under his breath. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before they overrun us." He locked eyes with Alvarez. Neither spoke the words they both thought. And the sound began. It was faint at first, a low, distant hum, almost like a storm. But it grew, deepening into a guttural roar that reverberated in their bones. The enemy fighters paused, looking skyward in confusion. From beyond the far ridge, something emerged. Gray and broad-winged, with a nose like a predator, and twin engines screaming defiance. The A-10 crested the ridge. Rains didn't waste time. She didn't circle for effect. The moment she had visual confirmation, she rolled in hard, nose down, cannon armed. Through her HUD, she saw the enemy positions marked in flickering green. She squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon unleashed hell. The sound wasn't a simple gunshot. It was a deep, ripping growl, like the sky itself was tearing apart. 30-millimeter rounds tore into the hillside, shredding cover, flipping bodies, and scattering fighters like ants. Dirt and rock erupted in geysers where the rounds hit. The SEALs cheered, though the sound was swallowed by the cannon's voice. Alvarez shouted into the radio, "Nice of you to join the party." Raines allowed herself a grim smile, but didn't respond. Her hands and eyes were locked on the target. She banked left, came around for another pass, and this time released a pair of Hydra rockets. They streaked into a cluster of enemy fighters, massing near a dry creek bed, detonating in a blossom of flame and shockwave. The enemy's momentum broke instantly. Those who could run, ran. Those who couldn't, didn't. Raines kept hammering, making sure no regrouping was possible. On the ground, Chief Daniels knew this wasn't just close air support, it was salvation. The enemy's coordinated assault had dissolved into panic. He motioned to his team, "We're moving now." They dragged the wounded onto makeshift stretchers and began climbing toward a secondary ridge, using the chaos as cover. Raines kept one eye on her fuel gauge and another on the enemy's retreat. She'd bought them a window, but the clock was ticking. "Ghost Rider, this is Hog 1. You've got a path north. I'll clear it for you." "Copy that, Hog 1, Alvarez," said his voice stronger now. "You're a damn angel with a warthog's teeth." She laughed once, short and sharp, before banking again. The Hog roared past the SEALs, low enough for them to see her helmet through the canopy. For a split second, every man looked up, not at a machine, but at the pilot who just changed the story from tragedy to survival. But this wasn't over. From the eastern ridgeline, new muzzle flashes appeared. The enemy had called reinforcements, and they were closing fast. Raines could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her. She had enough ammo for maybe 2 more serious runs before she'd be forced to RTB. But she also knew that if she left now, the SEALs wouldn't make it far. She throttled up again, pushing her Hog back into the climb, setting her sights on the fresh threat. "Not today," she muttered. "You don't get them today." The next pass was different. She slowed just enough to aim with surgical precision, sending cannon fire that stitched across the ridge like an angry seamstress. Fighters fell, weapons clattered, and the survivors melted back into the shadows. The SEALs used the break to gain the high ground, reaching a defensible position where they could finally breathe. Raines made one last sweep, ensuring no immediate pursuit. Only then did she key the mic. "Ghost Rider, Hog 1 is bingo fuel. You're clear to move to exfil. Godspeed." Chief Daniels answered, "We'll drink to you if we make it back." "You'd better," she replied, pulling up into the bright Afghan sky. Below, the dust swirled where her cannon had spoken, and in that chaos, the SEALs began their march toward life. Raines knew they would tell this story for years, not because of the A-10, not even because of her, but because sometimes, when every other option is gone, something roars over the ridge and hope returns. And for the SEALs on that ridge, hope had come with titanium armor, 7 barrels of fire, and the unflinching will of a pilot who refused to give up when even they had. The valley was a cauldron of chaos. Smoke spiraled upward in black, choking plumes, and the echoes of distant gunfire bounced off the canyon walls like the roar of an angry crowd. The SEALs were pinned down in what looked like an abandoned irrigation, ditch-thin cover that wouldn't hold if the insurgents decided to push harder. Lieutenant Commander Hall, the SEAL team leader, pressed his head into the dirt, frustration and dread gnawing at him. They'd been in this position for nearly an hour, cut off from their planned exfiltration point. The enemy had them flanked on both sides, and communications with the main force were unreliable at best. His last call for air support had ended, with a clipped negative assets available stand by. That had been 20 minutes ago, and in this kind of fight, 20 minutes might as well be an eternity. "Boss!" Petty Officer Reynolds shouted over the whine of incoming fire. "We've got movement on the ridge to the east. Looks like they're bringing up a DSHK." Hale's stomach sank. A DSHK, an old Soviet heavy machine gun, was a death sentence for anyone caught in the open. If the insurgents set it up on the ridge, they'd have direct line of sight to the ditch. "We don't have time to sit here," Hale said into his comms, hoping against hope someone was listening. "This is Viking 1. We need immediate fire support, or we're going to be red paint on the dirt. Over." Static. Then, a voice. Calm, crisp, female. "Viking 1, this is Hawkeye 2-1. Say your position." Hale almost didn't process it at first. The call sign wasn't one he recognized. "Hawkeye 2-1. Viking 1. We're at grid 37 TET 4318. 7,825. Situation. Multiple hostiles closing in from east and north. Heavy weapons incoming. Danger close. Repeat. Danger close. Copy your grid, Viking 1. Keep your heads down. I'll be there in 60 seconds. Hale frowned. 60 seconds? That was insane. She'd have to be right on top of them already. He wanted to believe it, but hope was a dangerous luxury. Then he heard the faint, rising growl of twin turbofan engines. It was a sound no ground troop ever forgot once they'd heard it. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog. It came over the ridge like a hunting bird, gray against the pale sky, its broad wings steady as stone. The shark mouth, painted on its nose, looked like it was grinning. And behind that grin was the GAU-8 Avenger, a 7-barrel 30mm cannon capable of shredding armored vehicles in seconds. The pilot's voice crackled over the radio again. "Viking 1, I see your smoke. I've got eyes on the DSHK crew. Cleared hot, cleared hot." Hale barked. The A-10 banked sharply, its wingtip almost scraping the air above the ridge. And then the sound hit a deafening brurt that seemed to shake the earth itself. Dirt exploded around the DSHK position, and in seconds, the threat was gone. "Targets neutralized," the pilot said matter-of-factly, as if she'd just taken out a paper target at the range. "But you've got more heat coming from your north." "I'm rolling in again." The SEALs watched in stunned silence as she made pass after pass, each time hitting with terrifying precision. Enemy fighters who had been moments from overrunning their position were now scattering for cover. Some never made it. "This is Viking 1, Hale said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We owe you one, Hawkeye 2-1. "Negative," she replied, a hint of steel in her tone. "You boys just stay alive. I'm not done yet." Another strafing run ripped through a cluster of vehicles trying to reposition. Fuel ignited in a spectacular fireball, sending black smoke spiraling into the sky. The ground shook under the force. "Boss," Reynolds said, eyes wide. "Who the hell is she?" Hale didn't answer. He was wondering the same thing. Whoever she was flying with the kind of aggression that only came from someone who had decided there was no alternative but total dominance. The radio crackled again. "Viking 1, I'm low on 30mm. I've got 2 Mavericks left, and full rockets. What's your priority?" Hale hesitated, scanning the battlefield. The northern ridge still had clusters of insurgents firing from behind rocks and low walls. If they could clear that side, the SEALs might be able to move to a more defensible position. "North ridge, near the tree line," Hale said. "They're the ones pinning us down." "Copy. Watch your ears." The A-10 climbed sharply, then dove like a falcon. 2 AGM-65 Maverick missiles streaked downrange, slamming into the ridge in twin bursts of flame. The concussive wave rolled through the valley, silencing the enemy fire for a precious few moments. "North Ridge clear," she reported. "You've got a window. Move now." Halle didn't waste time. "All right, move, move." The SEALs scrambled from the ditch, sprinting toward a cluster of rocks 200 meters away. Bullets still snapped through the air, but nowhere near as many. The Warthog stayed above them like an armored guardian, rolling in with rockets to break up any group that tried to close the gap. By the time they reached cover, the worst of the fight was over. The insurgents were in full retreat, leaving behind weapons, gear, and in some cases, wounded comrades. Halle dropped one knee, chest heaving, and keyed his mic. "Hawkeye 2-1, Viking 1, we're in the clear. You just saved 12 men who were out of options." There was a pause. Then your voice came back, softer now. "Glad I could help, Viking 1, but this fight's not over. You've still got a long way to go to make it home." The SEALs looked up at the sky, watching as the A-10 banked away, its engines roaring like some avenging spirit. None of them knew her name, but they knew they'd never forget that moment when the sky itself turned into a weapon, and a single pilot changed the fate of the men on the ground. The mountains trembled before the sound reached them. At first, the SEALs thought it was more artillery from the insurgents, until the unmistakable growl cut through the chaos. "Thunderbolt inbound," the radio crackled. Captain Ruiz looked up, squinting against the sun. Over the ridge, slicing the afternoon sky, came the A-10. Its shark-painted nose glinted in the light, its titanium fuselage almost shimmering. It wasn't just an aircraft. It was the last hope they hadn't dared to imagine. And at the stick was Captain Andrea, Iron Hand McAllister. She'd flown missions over hostile zones before, but this one was different. A call had been desperate, the coordinates isolated, and the window to act almost gone. She'd banked low, ignoring standard approach, threading through canyons that even helicopters feared. "SEAL team, this is Iron Hand. Sit tight. You're getting your air cover," she said, her voice calm, but carrying an edge that said she meant every word. Down below, insurgent fighters froze in shock. The A-10 was an old warhorse, slow by modern standards, but it was built for one thing: surviving in the kill zone and tearing apart anything on the ground. Andrea rolled into a steep dive. Her HUD lit up with targets, vehicles, weapon nests, figures moving between rocks. She could see the muzzle flashes aimed at the SEALs. Guns, guns, guns. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon opened up. Its brit was more felt than heard, a ripping, thunderous snarl that chewed through the ridgeline. Plumes of dust and fire erupted as the first enemy position evaporated. The SEALs ducked, hands over helmets. "Sweet mother," one of them whispered, peeking out just long enough to watch a fortified truck explode into a black bloom. Andrea didn't just attack, she controlled the fight. Each pass was calculated, her turns impossibly tight for a jet that size. She knew exactly how close she could skim the ridge without scraping it, using the terrain like a weapon. Targets marked, engaging west slope. She swung wide, then came back in, releasing a pair of rockets that walked fire up the hillside. The sound of enemy gunfire was drowned out completely. The mountains echoed with the sound of the Warthog's fury. Inside her cockpit, Andrea was ice. Her training had drilled her to focus on the scope, the angles, the fuel levels, but in the corner of her mind, she was aware. There were real men down there, and they were minutes from being overrun when she arrived. Her second pass caught 3 enemy technicals trying to reposition. She strafed low, bullets slicing them apart. Ammunition belts popped inside the wreckage like firecrackers. From the ground, Ruiz keyed the mic. "Iron Hand, you're saving our asses." "Not done yet," she replied. Another pass. Another burst. Another enemy position silenced. She saw the SEALs moving now, not retreating, but advancing under her cover. They were using her strikes to push up toward a defensible ridge. Her fire wasn't just killing targets, it was giving them momentum. An insurgent mortar team set up behind a cluster of rocks, clearly thinking the A-10 couldn't angle low enough to reach them. Andrea smiled behind her oxygen mask. She rolled left, dropped her wingtip until it was nearly scraping the slope, and brought the GAU-8 to bear. The mortar position ceased to exist, but her fuel gauge was sinking fast. She'd burned more in the canyon approach than she'd planned. Her ammo counter was also dropping, nearly half gone. She didn't tell the SEALs. They didn't need to hear doubt. Instead, she switched to her last cluster of rockets. Final pass. Mark your safe zone. Ruiz popped a green smoke grenade, and the swirling cloud gave her a boundary line. Everything beyond it became a killing field. She lined up her run, loosed the rockets, and watched fire ripple across the mountainside. The air smelled like cordite and burning diesel. When Andrea finally pulled up and circled, the west slope was silent. What was left of the insurgent force was either gone or too scattered to regroup. Iron Hand, this is Ruiz. We're moving to extraction point. Can you watch our 6? Copy that. Lead the way. She shadowed them from above, her A-10 lumbering in slow arcs, daring any surviving fighter to try again. None did. From her vantage point, she saw them reach the valley floor, where a pair of helicopters was inbound. The SEALs began loading. Up, moving the wounded first. Ruiz looked up at the warthog circling above, then keyed his mic one last time. Iron Hand, we owe you one. Andrea's reply was simple. Just doing my job, Captain. But as she banked away toward base, she knew it wasn't just another mission. Somewhere in those mountains, her arrival had turned the impossible into survival. And for those SEALs, the sound of her A-10's roar would never be forgotten. The ridge exploded in light and noise. Captain Lavra Kane's A-10 dropped over the crest like a predator finally sighting its prey. Below, the valley was a dark cauldron of smoke, muzzle flashes, and tracer fire. The SEAL team's comms had gone silent for 22 minutes, long enough for higher command to quietly start drafting the situation update that no one wanted to read. But Laura had no interest in paperwork or in the quiet acceptance of loss. Razor 1 on station. Eyes on friendlies marking now, she said into the mic, her voice low, steady, and burning with adrenaline. She saw them, tiny figures in the rocky wash, pinned behind boulders, muzzle flashes crawling toward them like fire ants. The Taliban fighters had set up overlapping arcs, effectively sealing the SEALs in a kill zone. Lavra didn't hesitate. She rolled the A-10 into a steep bank, feeling the aircraft groan under the maneuver. Her thumb rested on the weapons release, and her eyes tracked the rangefinder. The first 30 millimeters burst, ripped into the ridgeline above the SEALs, sending boulders tumbling and scattering the enemy snipers who had been hammering them from above. Down below, Chief Petty Officer Mason Harding felt the concussive thump through the ground. Dust and tiny stones rained down on his helmet. That's friendly, he shouted, grinning through gritted teeth. The Angel's here. The call came over the team's net. Hog in the sky? Stay low. She's got you. Lavra made her second pass low, dangerously low. The A-10's massive GAU-8, A Avenger. Cannon roared. Its sound not so much heard as felt a grinding mechanical snarl that chewed through the enemy line. Smoke and dirt erupted in ribbons, sending fighters diving for cover or vanishing entirely in the chaos. But Laura wasn't just attacking blindly. Her eyes locked on heat signatures, picking off threats that the ground team couldn't even see. Each burst was precise, deliberate, the mark of someone who understood that one stray round could end the lives she came to save. Between strafing runs, she scanned the valley. The SEALs were low on ammo. She could see it in their fire discipline. Harding was firing short, controlled bursts, while another SEAL was down to his last mag, holding it like a man guarding his final breath. Then the call came through her headset from AWACS. Razor 1, be advised, fuel low, recommend RTB. Laura's lips curled into something between a smile and a snarl. Negative, Control. Not leading until my people walk out. She banked again, heart pounding. On her HUD, a group of enemy fighters was breaking off, circling toward the southern escape route. If they flanked the SEALs there, it would be over. Lara switched to rockets. The first salvo lit up the canyon wall, collapsing a section of the path. The second obliterated the enemy approach entirely, the blast echoing like a god's hammer in the mountains. Down below, Harding felt the shift. The enemy's fire began to falter, some fighters fleeing entirely. This is it. Push forward. He yelled, rallying his men. The SEALs began to move, leapfrogging between cover. Lavra shadowed them like a guardian hawk, each of her passes clearing the next stretch ahead. She felt a strange connection. Every move they made, every dash to the next rock. She was there in the sky above, cutting the path open. But then trouble. From the north ridge, a flash caught her I-Man portable air defense system. Man pads? The missile launched, a sharp streak against the smoky sky. Lavra yanked the stick, chaff and flares bursting behind her like fireworks. The missile curved, desperate to catch her, then vanished in a blossom of harmless light. Her breathing was ragged now. One hit would tear her A-10 apart, and the valley's tight walls gave her little room to maneuver. Still, she didn't climb out. She didn't leave. Harding later swore he heard her engines before he saw her two deep, guttural notes echoing in the canyon like a war drum. And then she came back down the line, hammering the ridge with another merciless burst. On the final pass, Laura cut so close to the rock walls that dust and pebbles swirled in her wake. "You're clear to exfil," she said, voice calm. But inside she felt the burn of every second they had lost. The SEALs made it to the LZ, battered but alive. The extraction helo swept in, rotors chopping the smoke. As Harding climbed aboard, he looked up. The A-10 was banking away, slow and deliberate, like a predator satisfied with its hunt. And even as the halo pulled them out, Harding could swear he saw her dip her wings, a silent nod, an unspoken promise kept. But for Lavra, it wasn't over. She knew the enemy would regroup, that the valley still held danger. And as she turned for home, her fuel gauge blinking red, she whispered into the empty cockpit, "Not on my watch." The roar of her engines faded into the mountains, but in the hearts of the men she saved, it would echo forever. The valley was silent, now in eerie stillness, after the storm of gunfire and explosions. The sun dipped low behind the jagged ridges, casting long shadows over the battered landscape. The SEAL team was safe, loaded into the waiting helicopters, and climbing away from the fight. But in the cockpit of her A-10, Captain Lara Kane was far from finished. Her fuel gauge blinked dangerously low. The armor-plated hog had taken a beating. The left wing bore fresh shrapnel scars from an earlier missile narrowly avoided. Every creak of the airframe reminded her how close she had danced with death. But it was worth it. Back on the ground, Lieutenant Mason Harding wiped grime and sweat from his face, his hands trembling as adrenaline gave way to exhaustion. He looked out over the valley one last time, feeling the weight of what had transpired. They had been trapped isolated and outgunned, and now they were alive because one pilot refused to give up. A pilot who had roared over the ridge when all hope seemed lost. In the chopper, voices buzzed with gratitude and disbelief. "She saved us all," one whispered. "God bless that warthog," another said. The stories would spread quickly of an iron-willed woman in a metal beast who flew into the jaws of hell and tore it apart with thunder and fire. But Laura's mind was already on the journey home. The roar of her engines had been her anthem, her defiance against despair. She was the shield in the sky, the thunder in the storm. Yet the fight left scars, not just on the aircraft, but on her soul. The faces of the wounded, the echo of gunfire, the tightrope walk between life and death, it all carved deep into her. As she set course for base, Laura allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought of the SEALs warriors, who fought with every ounce of courage, trapped but unbroken. She thought of the friends she'd lost in past missions, of the families waiting at home, of the price of survival. And she made a vow. No matter the odds, no matter the danger, no matter the impossible terrain, she would answer every call. Because some battles were bigger than fear. As the A-10 thundered through the twilight sky, Laura whispered into her comms, a quiet promise carried on the wind. I'm coming for you. The mountains held their breath, and the roar of the foe Warthog faded into legend.